Hey everyone, and welcome back to Linguist Rising. If you're passionate about teaching language, you get that understanding how people learn is the secret sauce to becoming a truly great teacher. Today, we're laying that groundwork, digging into the core principles of second language acquisition, or SLA. This is the essential knowledge that's going to take your teaching to the next level.
So let's start with a question that I think we've all felt at some point. I mean, think about it. Picking up your first language. It felt like magic, right? It just happened. But trying to learn a second one, whoa, that often feels like a serious uphill climb, a lot of work. So why is that? That very question is right at the heart of everything we're going to talk about today.
To really get to the bottom of it, the whole field of second language acquisition is basically driven by three huge fundamental questions. First, what's the actual stuff a learner ends up knowing? Is it just a bunch of vocabulary and grammar rules, or something more? Second, how in the world does that knowledge get into their head? And third, the one we're all fascinated by. Why do some people just seem to be naturals at picking up new languages, while other people really struggle? These three questions, they're going to be our map.
And speaking of maps, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by comparing first and second language learning. Then we'll zoom in on the key differences in that journey. After that, we'll get into this massive puzzle that fascinates linguists, check out the different ways researchers try to solve it, and then, and this is the important part, we'll bring it all back to what it means for you as a teacher.
So let's start with our tale of two languages. You can think of it like this. On one side, you've got the effortless genius. That's the baby soaking up their first language, their L1. And on the other side, you have the conscious student. That's the person, kid or adult, who's deliberately trying to learn a second language, or L2. As you're about to see, their journeys are just worlds apart.
I mean, the way we acquire our first language is just mind-blowing. Get this. Before baby is even 6 months old, they've already made basically every vowel and consonant sound that exists in any human language. This isn't them studying, right? This is a deep, biological, totally unconscious process. That's the effortless genius we're talking about. It's our baseline for what's possible.
Okay, so let's really break this down. To really get the difference between that genius baby and the conscious student, we need to compare their journeys side by side. We can look at this in three stages: where they start, what happens in the middle, and where they end up. So first, let's just quickly define two terms we're going to use. The initial state is simply what a learner has in their toolkit when they begin, and the final state is the level of skill they have when the main learning process is done. And believe me, for L1 and L2 learners, these states could not be more different.
And this chart, wow, this really lays it all out. Just look at the initial state. A baby starts with this pure, innate ability to learn a language. But an L2 learner, well, they show up with a whole different toolkit. A fully formed first language, tons of knowledge about the world, social skills. But that toolkit is kind of a double-edged sword. It can help, for sure, but it can also get in the way through something called transfer. And check out the conditions. Things like motivation or going to class are huge for an L2 learner. For a baby, totally irrelevant. And the destination is different too. Native skill versus a unique kind of multilingual skill.
Now, that developing system inside an L2 learner's head has a special name, and it is a huge concept for teachers. It's called interlanguage. Here's the thing. When a learner speaks, it's not just a broken, error-filled version of the language they're trying to learn. No, it's its own creative, logical, rule-based system. It's their brain building its own unique grammar. So as teachers, seeing errors not as mistakes, but as clues to how their interlanguage is working, that's a total game changer.
And this whole idea of a learner's brain building its own system leads us straight into one of the biggest, most fascinating puzzles in all of linguistics. Basically, if we're not just imitating what we hear, then how do we end up knowing all these things about a language that nobody ever directly taught us?
This is actually known as the logical problem of language learning. Just think about the language a little kid hears every day. It's messy. It's full of people interrupting each other, starting sentences they don't finish, making slips of the tongue. And yet, out of all that messy, fragmented data, they build this incredibly complex, complete grammatical system. They can say things they've never, ever heard before. How is that even possible? The famous linguist Noam Chomsky gave this a name that really stuck: the poverty of the stimulus argument. The idea is that the stimulus, the language we hear, is just too poor, too limited to explain the incredibly rich knowledge we end up with. And what that suggests is that there has to be something else going on, some kind of innate blueprint for language that's already in our brains.
And that is the puzzle that drives so much research.
So, you've got this giant puzzle. How do researchers even start to try and solve it to answer our three big questions? Well, they don't just use one tool. Instead, they look at the problem through a bunch of different lenses, and each one gives us a different piece of the answer.
We can basically group them into three big perspectives. The linguistic lens looks at the structure of language itself, asking questions like, does the grammar of your first language make it harder to learn the grammar of a new one? Then there's the psychological lens, which zooms right into the brain, looking at things like memory and attention. And finally, the social lens zooms out, looking at the context. How does learning with a friend versus a teacher change things? To get the full picture, you really need all three.
Okay, so we have covered a lot of theory. So let's land the plane. What does any of this mean for you, the person who's actually in the classroom, or maybe you're the one trying to learn a language? How does all this stuff make you a better teacher?
It all comes down to this. 1. Know why your students are there. Are they learning for a job, for travel, to talk to family? Their goals change everything. 2. Remember, you're not just teaching grammar. You're teaching a whole person, with a brain that works a certain way, living in a social world. 3. Use that knowledge to be flexible. Adapt your teaching to who's in front of you. And 4, and this is a big one, be really, really cautious of anyone who says they have the one single best method. Because as we've seen, every learner's journey is way too complex and personal for a one-size-fits-all solution.
And ultimately, this right here is our North Star. The goal isn't just for students to know the rules of a language. It's to help them develop what one linguist called meaning potential. It's about empowering them to do things with the language, to share their ideas, to connect with people, to build relationships. The grammar, the vocabulary, those are just the tools. Communication is the real prize.
So I'll leave you with a question to think about. Based on everything we've talked about today, from the student's starting point to the idea of interlanguage to our ultimate goal of creating meaning, what is one single insight that could genuinely change how you teach or how you learn a language starting tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me on Linguist Rising.